He never wanted to rule, yet he became the most powerful man in the world. Tiberius was a soldier, a general, a man who craved peace, but Rome gave him an empire. Forced into Augustus's shadow, he rose to greatness on the battlefield, only to retreat into darkness on the island of Capri. There, while his deputy plotted to steal the throne, Tiberius became a ghost emperor, watching, waiting, and unleashing a reign of terror fueled by suspicion. Was he a capable ruler trapped by fate, or a paranoid tyrant who destroyed the legacy of Augustus? This is the chilling story of Tiberius, the reluctant emperor of Rome. Imagine living in the shadow of the greatest man Rome had ever known. Augustus, the first emperor, the man who turned a collapsing republic into a flourishing empire, was more than a ruler. He was a symbol of stability, a father figure to Rome itself. And standing quietly in that shadow was a man named Tiberius. From the very beginning, Tiberius's life was complicated. He wasn't Augustus' biological son. In fact, Augustus never really seemed to want Tiberius as his heir. Tiberius came from the Claudian family, an old and powerful line, but they didn't always get along well with Augustus' side, the Julians. When Augustus married Tiberius's mother, Livia, Tiberius was just a child. Overnight, he found himself connected to the most powerful man in Rome. But it was a connection that carried more burden than blessing. As a young man, Tiberius showed himself to be everything Rome could want in a leader. He was tall, disciplined, and a brilliant military commander. His campaigns in Germany and along the Danube made him one of the most respected generals of his time. Soldiers adored him for his fairness and his skill. But despite his victories, Tiberius often felt unappreciated, as though his achievements were overshadowed by Augustus's favorites, men like Gaius and Lucius, Augustus's grandsons, who were groomed to inherit the empire. Tiberius' personal life only deepened his sense of bitterness. He had been married to a woman he loved, Vipsania, but Augustus forced him to divorce her and marry Julia, Augustus's own daughter. It was a political match designed to tie Tiberius more closely to the Julian line, but it was a disaster. Julia was nothing like Vipsania. Their marriage was cold and miserable, and Tiberius never forgave Augustus for tearing him away from the only woman he truly cared for. For years, Tiberius seemed to accept his secondary role. He carried out his duties, led armies, and lived in the shadow of Augustus's chosen heirs. But fate has a way of rewriting plans. One by one, Augustus's carefully prepared successors, Marcellus, Gaius, Lucius, died young, leaving Augustus with few options. By process of elimination, not passion, Augustus was forced to look again at the man he had overlooked for so long, Tiberius. In AD 4, Augustus finally adopted Tiberius as his son and heir. But even then the choice felt reluctant. Augustus added conditions, forcing Tiberius to adopt Germanicus, another young relative beloved by the Roman people, almost as if to soften the blow in case Tiberius disappointed them. So, Tiberius entered the final years of Augustus' reign not as the beloved heir, but as the last option. He was brilliant, capable, and experienced, but he knew deep down that Rome didn't want him. They wanted someone else, anyone else, to carry the legacy of Augustus. And that's where our story begins, with a man chosen to rule, not because he was loved, but because no one else was left. When Rome thought of Tiberius, they didn't picture a charismatic leader giving rousing speeches in the forum. They thought of a soldier. Tiberius was at his best, not in politics, but on the battlefield, where discipline and strategy mattered more than charm. From a young age, he understood the Roman military machine better than almost anyone of his generation. He wasn't reckless or flashy like some commanders. Instead, he was calculated, precise, and above all, patient. While others sought glory, Tiberius sought results. His men respected him because he led with fairness. He didn't waste lives for fame. He planned carefully, struck decisively, and brought them home alive. One of his earliest major campaigns came in Germania, a brutal and unforgiving frontier where Rome's legions often struggled. Thick forests, ambushes, and constant uprisings made it a nightmare for generals, but Tiberius excelled there. He reorganized supply lines, kept morale high, and slowly pushed back against Rome's enemies. His campaigns in Pannonia and along the Danube further cemented his reputation. Rome's borders were safer because of him, and even Augustus, so often cool toward Tiberius, couldn't deny his effectiveness. But while his professional record was shining, his personal struggles continued to cast shadows. His forced marriage to Julia left him bitter and withdrawn. Julia's scandals, her public affairs, her reputation for excess, were humiliating for Tiberius, a man who valued discipline and control. The marriage became unbearable, and the weight of Augustus's expectations only made it worse. In 6 BC, exhausted and frustrated, Tiberius did something shocking. He walked away. He retired from public life entirely, retreating to the island of Rhodes. To the Roman people, it seemed unthinkable. Here was Augustus's adopted son, a decorated general, heir to the empire, simply stepping aside. Some whispered that he was tired of being treated like a pawn. Others thought he was sulking because Augustus favored his younger relatives. Whatever the truth, his retreat spoke volumes. Tiberius was not a man who craved power for its own sake. He craved peace, yet Rome couldn't let him go. After years in semi-exile, the political landscape shifted again. Augustus's other heirs, his grandsons, the jewels of his dynasty, died one after another, leaving a gaping hole in the line of succession. Suddenly, the man who had withdrawn in bitterness was the only realistic choice left. Reluctantly, Tiberius returned to Rome in AD 2. He was older, more cautious and less trusting than before, but his skill hadn't faded. When Augustus died in AD 14, there was no avoiding destiny. Tiberius, the soldier who had never wanted to be emperor, now wore the purple. At first, things went surprisingly well. Tiberius was no Augustus, but he was competent. He respected the Senate, kept Rome's finances stable, and ensured the army remained loyal. His early reign promised stability, yet beneath the surface, old wounds lingered, resentment, paranoia, and the feeling that he was ruling an empire that never truly wanted him. And soon, those wounds would begin to shape the future of Rome in ways no one could have imagined. At first, Rome thought Tiberius might be another Augustus, serious, disciplined, and committed to the empire's stability. And for a while that seemed true. He handled finances responsibly, he didn't waste money on grand spectacles, and he even showed respect for the Senate. But as the years dragged on, cracks began to show. Tiberius was not a man who enjoyed ruling. He had always preferred the order of military life to the chaos of politics. In the Senate, he was stiff, awkward, and suspicious. He avoided public ceremonies, hated flattery, and resented the constant attention that came with power. Slowly, his disinterest in day-to-day governance turned into withdrawal. By AD 26, Tiberius made a decision that shocked the empire. He left Rome entirely. He retreated to the island of Capri, a rocky paradise off the coast of Naples. From his villa, perched high above the sea, he could see everything but deal with nothing. Capri was beautiful, isolated, and above all, safe. But Rome was not safe. By abandoning the capital, Tiberius handed enormous power to one man, Lucius alias Sejanus, the ambitious commander of the Praetorian Guard. Sejanus had been at Tiberius's side for years, presenting himself as a loyal advisor. With the emperor gone, he became the gatekeeper to power. Senators, generals, and ambassadors all had to go through Sejanus if they wanted Tiberius's ear. At first, this arrangement seemed practical. Tiberius disliked politics, and Sejanus was eager to handle it. But soon, whispers spread through Rome. Sejanus wasn't just advising the emperor, he was ruling in his place. Sejanus began reshaping Rome to suit his ambitions. He consolidated the Praetorian Guard, moving them into a single fortified camp near the city, making them a visible and intimidating presence. He built alliances with senators, courted noble families, and slowly pushed rivals out of power. Even members of the imperial family weren't safe. Germanicus, the beloved general who had once seemed destined for the throne, was dead, possibly poisoned. His widow, Agrippina, and her children became constant targets of Sejanus's schemes. Meanwhile, in Capri, Tiberius grew more isolated. Letters and reports were his only connection to Rome, and they were carefully filtered by Sejanus. The emperor, who had once led legions across Europe, was now a distant figure, surrounded by astrologers, informers, and a handful of courtiers. Rumors about his life on Capri spread like wildfire, tales of debauchery, cruelty, and twisted pleasures. Whether true or exaggerated, they painted a picture of an emperor who had abandoned his people both physically and morally. This withdrawal marked a turning point. Rome had an emperor in name, but the real power was in the hands of a man who wanted it for himself. And as Sejanus grew bolder, the empire slipped closer to betrayal, paranoia, and bloodshed. For years, Sejanus had been the most powerful man in Rome. With Tiberius living in isolation on Capri, the Praetorian prefect moved like a shadow through the Senate, through the courts, through the very heart of the empire. People bowed to him as if he were already emperor. But ambition has no limits, and for Sejanus, power by proxy wasn't enough. He wanted the throne. At first, he moved carefully. He married into powerful families, quietly eliminating rivals through charges of treason and carefully staged trials. Anyone who stood in his way, especially the family of Germanicus, was targeted. Agrippina the Elder, Germanicus's widow, was accused of plotting against Tiberius. She was arrested, along with her sons. What had once been the most beloved bloodline in Rome was now being crushed, one accusation at a time. The Senate, terrified of Sejanus and his Praetorian Guard, went along with his purges. Each trial ended the same way: exile, imprisonment, or execution. Rome was learning to fear not the emperor, but his deputy. By AD 31, Sejanus believed his moment had come. He was consul, one of the highest positions in the state, and he controlled the emperor's guard. Many believed he was preparing to marry into the imperial family and make himself the next Augustus. In Rome, some even whispered that Tiberius, old and secluded on Capri, might already be dead, with Sejanus ruling in his place. But Tiberius wasn't dead. He was watching. The emperor had always been cautious, always suspicious, and though he had once trusted Sejanus, reports began to reach him, quiet warnings that his prefect was overreaching. Whether through spies or sheer paranoia, Tiberius became convinced that Sejanus was plotting to overthrow him. Then, in a masterstroke of cunning, Tiberius struck. On October 18th, AD 31, the Senate assembled in Rome, expecting to hear more honors granted to Sejanus. But instead, a letter from the emperor was read aloud. At first, it praised Sejanus, keeping the Senate off guard. But as the letter continued, the tone shifted. Suspicion, then condemnation, then outright accusation. Sejanus was a traitor. The Senate erupted in shock. God seized Sejanus on the spot. The man who had ruled Rome in all but name was dragged away in chains. Within hours, he was executed, his body thrown to the mob. People who had once fawned over him now trampled his corpse, as if erasing his memory would protect them from suspicion. But Tiberius's vengeance didn't stop there. The fall of Sejanus unleashed a storm of terror. Anyone connected to him, family, friends, allies, was hunted down. Executions piled up, prisons overflowed, and Rome drowned in paranoia. No one felt safe because no one knew if the emperor truly saw conspiracies, or if he was simply lashing out in fear. The betrayal had ended, but in its aftermath, Tiberius's rule would grow darker than ever before. After the fall of Sejanus, Tiberius was no longer the reluctant emperor people had once pitied. He became something far darker, a ruler consumed by suspicion, convinced that enemies lurked in every shadow. The purge that followed Sejanus's execution spread terror across Rome. Senators, nobles, even members of the imperial family lived in constant fear of betrayal. Trials became spectacles of paranoia. People were accused of treason for careless words, for distant friendships, even for dreams that supposedly hinted at disloyalty. Convictions came fast, punishments came faster, and the prisons filled with Rome's elite. From Capri, Tiberius controlled it all through letters. Cold, precise, and merciless, his words carried the weight of death sentences. He no longer showed patience or restraint. He trusted no one. The man who once led legions with calm discipline now ruled an empire through fear. Rumors about his life on Capri only made things worse. Stories spread of cruel entertainments, of dark indulgences, of an emperor detached from Rome's reality. Whether these tales were true or exaggerated by his enemies, they hardened his reputation. To the Roman people, Tiberius wasn't the dutiful general or the capable administrator. He was a shadow emperor, far away, watching, judging, and punishing, and yet, in a strange way, his reign wasn't a complete disaster. The empire remained stable. The frontiers were secure, the treasury was strong, and the machinery of government kept turning. Unlike later emperors, Tiberius didn't plunge Rome into reckless wars or bankrupt it with vanity projects. His caution, even his suspicion, ensured the empire survived. But survival came at a price. Rome endured, but it lived in fear. In AD 37, after more than 2 decades as emperor, Tiberius died at the age of 77. The end came on the mainland in Campania, far from the island where he had hidden himself for so long. His death was greeted not with grief, but with relief. Crowds celebrated in the streets. People rejoiced as though a tyrant had finally been overthrown. Even in death, Tiberius left behind uncertainty. Some whispered that he had been smothered to speed along the succession of his great-nephew Caligula. Others said he simply succumbed to old age. What mattered more than how he died was what he left behind, an empire stable, but scarred. Tiberius's legacy remains one of contradictions. He was a brilliant general who never wanted to be emperor, a competent ruler who became a paranoid recluse, a man who saved Rome's borders but crushed its spirit. History remembers him not with admiration but with unease. He was the emperor who ruled from the shadows, respected for his ability, feared for his suspicion, and ultimately unloved by the empire he never truly wanted to lead. And that is the story of Tiberius, the reluctant emperor who proved that sometimes the greatest burden is not seizing power, but being forced to hold it. When Tiberius died, Rome did not mourn. Crowds filled the streets, celebrating the end of a reign that had kept the empire alive, but at the cost of fear and blood. He was never the leader Augustus dreamed of, nor the hero the Roman people wanted, yet without him, Rome might not have survived its most fragile years. Tiberius leaves us with a haunting question. What happens when a man who never wanted power is forced to carry it? In his suspicion, he kept Rome stable. In his fear, he scarred its soul. History remembers him not as a savior, but as a shadow, the reluctant emperor, who could never escape the burden of the throne.